Hello everyone, Professor Kurzluck here. So I wanted to make our video about public opinion, what it is, how it forms, how we measure it, and why it matters for American politics. Kind of combining what we talked about in class, what we read about for the week, and trying to connect it with the world around us. So when we think of what is public opinion or why we care about public opinion. Public opinion is often described as the foundation of democracy. Leaders, whether they're presidents or they're in the House of Representatives or the Senate, they claim to act in the name of the people, Policymakers regularly cite polls as evidence that their actions are supported, that what they're doing is popular. The reality, though, is at times a bit more complicated. Like everything we talk about and learn about in political science, in public policy, in American government, the reality is oftentimes complicated. Public opinion is not one single voice. We know it's fragmented, it's diverse, and sometimes it's contradictory. So as we talked about in class, but we can use the example again here. If you ask Americans whether they want lower taxes, most say yes. We see it in the polling data. If you ask whether they want more spending on Social Security, more spending on health care, more spending on education, they also say yes. So people want less money going into the system and more money coming out of it. This seems contradictory, right? So that tension is oftentimes at the heart of democratic politics. So today, for this video, we'll look at how those opinions form, how we try to measure them, and how much they can actually shape what government does. So let's just start with a definition. Public opinion is the collection of popular views about people, about events, about issues, and really on anything. Data is collected through public polling. So your own opinion matters, but public opinion is bigger. It's the aggregate of millions of individual voices. When we talk about public opinion on something like climate change, we don't mean one person's opinion alone. We mean the general distribution of voices, of views across the whole population. So, public opinion has three important qualities. First, it is dynamic. It changes with events. Think about how public support for war rises after attacks or declines after long stalemates. We used the example earlier in the semester about 9/11 and how the public's view of foreign policy, foreign affairs, changed and shifted after the 9/11 terror attack. So second, public opinion is stable in the aggregate. Even though individuals change their minds, overall patterns remain fairly predictable. And third, it is diverse. It looks different by age, by race, by gender, by religion, geography, and education level. One of the most dramatic examples is on same-sex marriage. In 1996, only about 27% of Americans supported legal recognition. By 2022, over 70% did. That's a large reversal in just one generation. It shows us how society changes, how social activism and social change, leadership change can reshape public opinion over time and sometimes seemingly rather quickly. So when we talk about public opinion, remember, it is not static, it is not uniform, but it is a powerful voice. So this then raises the question, Where do our opinions come from? Where do our views in the world come from? Political scientists use the term political socialization. Polarization is something else. So the term political socialization. This is the lifelong process by which people develop their political attitudes, their beliefs, their values. So the first and often strongest influence is family. Children pick up cues from their parents, whether it's explicitly about whether it's about political discussion, whether you're sitting at the dinner table talking about politics, or just children, how they observe their parents talk about leaders, their parents talk about issues, and their parents just talk about the values that they hold. So these ideas, even if they're not talking about politics specifically, do shape people's views. So next is school. From civic lessons to history classes, from saying the Pledge of Allegiance to taking part in student government, schools transmit civic values. Peers, of course, also play an important role, especially in adolescence and in college. Many people shift politically in response to their friends' influence. Maybe at university when you're starting out college and you're making new friends, and that can shape your political views. And then there's the media: television, radio, newspapers, of course, social media. These outlets tell us how and what to think. Even if they don't tell us exactly what to think, they're still shaping our views. Maybe what to think about, what's important. This is called agenda setting. They also shape how we think about issues, known as framing. For example, is immigration framed as a question of economic growth, cultural identity, or security threats? Each framing leads people towards different conclusions of what is important. Religion may also shape opinion. Faith traditions influence moral outlooks on issues like abortion, on marriage, on poverty, and social justice. And then there are major events that make and mark entire generations. For example, those who came of age after the 9/11 attacks were shaped by concerns about terrorism and national security in a way that maybe an earlier generation was not. Millennials who graduated into the Great Recession were shaped by economic uncertainty. Gen Z has been shaped by climate change debates, mass shootings, and the COVID-19 pandemic. All of these factors combine to form our political ideology, or our set of beliefs about what government should do. Some people lean liberal, favoring government intervention, government action in the economy, and progressive social change. Others lean conservative, preferring limited government and traditional values. Some are libertarians, socially liberal but physically conservative. Others are populists, economically liberal but maybe socially conservative. Most Americans, though, don't fit neatly into one category. They mix and match. Americans, our political ideas and ideologies are complex and not easy to always just put in one box. So let's connect this to a major trend: political polarization. Polarization is when people cluster into opposing camps with little overlap. We can think of two kinds. Ideological polarization is when opinions on issues grow further apart. Effective polarization is when people do not only disagree but actively dislike members of the other party. So when we think of why has polarization grown? One argument our textbook brings up is elite leadership. Party leaders in Congress have moved further apart, and voters have followed those cues. Another is media. Cable news, talk radio, and social media amplify differences. Online, algorithms create echo chambers where we mostly see content that matches our own views. Geography matters as well. Cities and suburbs lean strongly Democratic, while rural areas lean Republican. This sorting reinforces division, and this is a self sorting where you decide to live, where you choose to move to. The media, of course, also plays a powerful role through agenda setting, like we talked about, priming and framing of issues. One outlet may call a protest a riot. Another may call it an uprising. A third may just call it a peaceful protest. Same event, different narrative. Over time, repeated frames shape how the public thinks about issues. Now, if public opinion is so central, we need a way to measure it. That's where polling comes in. The basic steps are: define the population, draw a representative sample, ask neutral questions, collect responses, and report results with a margin of error. When polls are done carefully, they provide valuable insights. But there are, of course, pitfalls, and mistakes happen. In 1936, the magazine Literary Digest predicted that Alf Landon would beat Franklin Roosevelt. They mailed surveys to people with cars and telephones, wealthier Americans who leaned Republicans. So these wealthier Americans leaned Republicans. Thus, the Literary Digest were completely wrong. Gallup, with a much smaller but representative sample, got it right. In 1948, most polls showed Dewey defeating Truman, but pollsters stopped polling too early, missing a late swing in the election. Truman, as pictures that we see in our textbook and in the PowerPoint slide, and we've probably seen throughout our schooling, Truman held up a famous newspaper headline declaring Dewey defeats Truman, even as he celebrated victory. And then in 2016, national polls were actually fairly accurate in predicting Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote. But state polls underestimated Donald Trump's strength in the Midwest, partly because they didn't account for differences in education and captured the wrong respondents. Thus, it came as a surprise to many pundits and political scientists when Donald Trump was declared the winner in the Electoral College. So beyond sampling errors, question wording matters a lot. So in class, we used the silly example of how short is Napoleon. We saw a biased question, and we all chuckled from that, but we see biased questions quite a lot in polling that's maybe done by less reputable sources. So ask whether people support welfare, and fewer will say yes than if you ask about do you support assistance for the poor. So words matter. How your questions are shaped matters. Technology is also a challenge. Few people answer calls from unknown numbers today, especially young people. That makes it harder and more expensive to try to reach a truly random sample of voters. Finally, we need to interpret margin of error carefully. If a poll shows candidate A with 49% and candidate B with 47%, with a margin of error of plus or minus 3, the truth could be anywhere from a small lead to a tie for either candidate. That's why close races are so hard to call. So while polls are powerful, we need to read them critically, like anything else in political science. So, how much does a public opinion really matter? Surprisingly, maybe to some people, unsurprisingly, maybe to others, quite a lot, but not always in straightforward ways. On campaigns, candidates rely heavily on polls to decide where to travel, what issues to emphasize, and how to spend money. In the media, polls dominate coverage. Horse race journalism focuses on who's up and who's down, often at the expense of policy discussion. On voters, polls can have psychological effects. A frontrunner may benefit from a bandwagon effect, attracting support simply by being seen as likely to win. Conversely, some candidates benefit from an underdog effect, rallying sympathy and motivation because maybe they're not polling very well. On institutions, approval ratings shape political power. George W. Bush's approval soared to 90% after 9/11, giving him enormous influence. But when his ratings collapsed during the Iraq War, he became much politically weaker. Congress has chronically low approval ratings, though most people still re-elect their own representatives. So we see this. When Congress is polled, it has pretty poor rating. But when people are asked about how much do you support your candidate, we see those numbers are much higher. The Supreme Court was long the most trusted branch of government, but its approval rating has dropped in recent years. Especially we see it drop after controversial rulings like the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade. We see when public polling, when people are asked how impartial, how do you think the Supreme Court is, we see a decline. But here's the key though. Leaders don't always follow public opinion. Sometimes they resist it. Harry Truman desegregated the military in 1948 despite major opposition. Lyndon Johnson, pushed for civil rights laws even when many Americans resisted. Leadership sometimes requires going against the grain and doing what maybe isn't popular at the time. So let's bring our discussion together. Public opinion is the collection of attitudes and beliefs held by the people. It is shaped by socialization, families, schools, peers, media, religion, and events. It is measured through polling, which is powerful, but we know imperfect. And it influences campaigns, policymaking, and legitimacy, but it doesn't always dictate outcomes. The big takeaway is this: democracy is a constant balancing act between representing the will of the people and exercising leadership that may, at times, challenge popular opinion. So, if you made it here to the end, thank you. Hopefully, you've been able to do the reading for the politics of public opinion, and some of these things that we talked about, we definitely dug into deeper. So, thank you very much.